welcome everybody to Celebrating Technology Leaders series. We are in the episode 17, and this is a series that has been carefully curated and nurtured by Bushra Anjum and supported also as of late by Taylor. So with big shout out to them for having created this wonderful session today, especially with the selection of the panelists that we have today to talk about women driving innovation in open source. So with us, we have Eriol Fox she's an open source designer from Superbloom Design. We have also Rizel Scarlett, who is a tech lead in open source and DevRel block. With us is also Mary Grygleski, who is a director of emerging technologies in Calibrity. And we also have Carlisia Campos, who is a senior software engineer. So traditionally, we run these sessions as a live event, but today we are going to release it, record it live and release it at a later date. So the session today would be sharing the stories of this wonderful panel, talking about their personal journeys from just curious onlookers in terms of software development to actual code contributors. And hopefully we'll get some practical advice on how to get involved and meaningfully do contributions in this space. A lot of our audience here are actually looking for insights into what drives open source communities. And also we as ACM women, we are always looking for ideas for building inclusive spaces that welcome everybody. So we'd like for each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and I'd like you to share individually your insights into your educational background, what was your career path, and any unique experience that may have shaped your journey to where you are today. So who would like to start?
I can start.
There you go.
Thank you. All right, so my name is Rizel Scarlett. I'm a tech lead of open source developer relations at Block. Super long and a new title for me, so I was like, let me get this right. But my journey into getting into open source, I kind of had a bit of a wavy journey, I guess, or not a straight path, where I was originally studying psychology, and because of like financial issues, I was like, let me switch on over to a different career path. So I ended up having to drop out of college, and I went to a coding boot camp, learned how to code, and after that I got my degree in computer science. And while working as a software engineer, I discovered this idea of developer advocacy or DevRel and teaching people and getting them excited about different technologies and tools. And I just so happened to get a chance to work at GitHub, which at the time they were like branding themselves as the home of open source. And I got to learn so much about like how to contribute to open source. That was like when I made my first open source contribution, how to maintain different open source projects, different issues that maintainers were having and contributors were having in the ecosystem. And so that was a really rich experience for me. And now I've moved over to Block, and Block is actually, even though it's not super popular in the open source space, it actually has a lot of very cool open source projects, like Hermit, which is kind of like a package manager, and then they're now getting into AI as everyone else is, with an open source AI agent. So that's been my experience and my journey in open source. I can't remember if I'm missing anything else from your question.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you. Shall we hear now from Eriol?
Sure. Yeah. I love hearing people's stories of how they get into open source though. So thank you, Rizel, for your story. So my educational background, I did a bachelor's degree in art and design. I did a typical kind of design pathway, which will be familiar to people within the design profession. I did some internships at various proprietary commercial organizations, and right up until I pursued a master's in graphic communication, I was proprietary commercial. And the only times that I encountered open source as a designer was when I was working in organizations very, very closely with developer teams, and they would, come over to the design space and talk about the design work that I was working on, and they would introduce me to things like libraries and frameworks, and I'd be like, oh, that's great. It's great that developers have these things that they can share, but I guess that's not for us designers. And so my first encounter with open source was very much like, oh, that's a lovely thing for developers to get involved in. And it seemed very much to me, it was like an integral part of how developers become developers. Like they grow their skills, they participate in open source as like a fundamental part of their career development. And there's not really equivalent in design. But fast forward career-wise, while I was doing a lot of commercial proprietary design, I was really involved in my local community. So running a community forum, I helped with asylum seeker groups, I ran homework clubs for kids 4 nights a week for like migrant families, I ran community gardens. I was really involved in a lot of social, environmental community work. And I was looking for a new job after finishing my master's, and I found this job at this organization called Ushahidi. They're a Kenyan open source software organization. They started in 2006, 2007, when Kenya had their first democratic elections, and they created an open source platform to crowdsource information from citizens about what was going on in the ground around those elections. And they built and maintained this platform. It's used in lots of different other ways than just elections now. But that was my first entryway into participating in open source as a paid team member as a designer. So my first job in design, in open source design was with Ushahidi. And since then I've been paid and as a contributor in mostly human rights related open source software and social good civic tech open source software primarily. And then I'm also a maintainer for the open source design community. So I've become very involved in how designers get involved in open source software.
Wonderful. And I love that contrast of, backgrounds and experiences, like from the very kind of classical, if you like, how you imagine somebody working into open source, came with a computer science background, from completely different experience where actually your training was in something very different, and somehow we're converging into this space because, there's room for everybody. So shall we hear from Carlisia now?
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. I'm so excited.
Welcome.
Thank you. The very short answer to how I came to open source is this. I dared to interview for this small company that was hiring engineers for both commercial and open source. And I didn't even know really until I went through the process, the interview process, but they made me an offer to work exclusively on open source projects. And it was a fantastic company. And so that's how I started. So it was a question of being in the right place at the right time. At that point, I had almost zero to show in terms of contributing code in open source. I have been working as a back-end software engineer for a long time. So they definitely didn't hire me because of that. They hired me because of other things. And that's really how I can open up and say how I really got into be able to even interview at this company. So I'm Brazilian, and I like saying that to get out of the way, all the guesswork, like, where is your accent from? That's where it's from. When I was a late teenager, end of high school, I was doing an internship at this company. It was a 6 months. They renewed it, and they had an IT department. And I had no idea. Nobody had computers. This is Brazil, right? I had no idea what programming was or what computers did, but I knew they did something. I'm like, I was so curious. So I begged to be placed. They wanted to renew my internship. I begged to be placed in the IT department. and they placed me as a secretary for a big director. So I'm like, yeah, okay, so tech is not for me, I guess, because I mean, frankly, right? I'm a young girl working as a secretary anyway. So from there, I came to the US, and it was a long journey for me to get to a point where I went for a master's degree in computer science. And it was a very tentative journey of second guessing myself. Can I do this work? Can I do this work? Should I invest money and get an undergraduate degree? That was a question for me. It wasn't, taken for granted. And then I was like, I really want to do programming. So I need to have a computer science degree, because how else would I learn? I didn't have friends who did that. I didn't have access to learn any other way. So I went the formal route. Very glad I did. Paid off hugely. And the way I got into that with that job in open source was because I had other skills that were like on point for the job and others that were transferable. So at some point, I am a Go programmer right now. I've been working with the Go language for a while. When the Go language like started becoming popular, I got very involved in the community. I co-founded a nonprofit to help people learn to teach and learn Go. And it was such a fantastic experience. And for 2 years, like all my free time was devoted to that. I really loved the work. So that, because I wanted to learn Go, I wanted other people to learn Go. I have my opinions. I think Go is fantastic. Every language has a trade-off, but from there, I did a lot of work in the open. So I did have a lot of GitHub contribution stuff, but it wasn't code. And so at that point, I was working as a Go developer. So I was qualified on paper. I always question, am I really qualified for this? And I had people around me saying, you need to apply for this. And then I was like, there is no way I'll pass the interview. Like, this is an amazing job. But I had people like, I know how you work. I apply. You need to apply. They're looking for people just like you. And it really was like working in open source requires a lot of leadership skills, being able to see from other people's perspective. I had done that so much in other contexts. So I think people really understood that, and I can code a little bit too, so that didn't hurt.
This is so wonderful, Carlisia. I think there's so many good things in that story that you shared, some of resilience, of like, that I'm going to try this. I'm not going to be a secretary. I want to do this. Of curiosity, of wanting to learn things, and also of community, wanting to share what you've learned and getting others on board. Also, I heard some things I expect we can explore a bit deeper with the other panelists is about what constitutes actual contributions. We have this conception that only open source is coding, but actually improving the quality of the comments, there are a lot of things that is contributions in open source. So I think we're going to move to Mary now and then go deeper into open source. Mary.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. And I'm really impressed by everybody's experience. And it's just so unique, right? Everybody coming in from different, path, and we're kind of in the same kind of direction, open source. And it means a lot of things too. And it just has opened up so much opportunities. Right? It's amazing, I should say. So, okay. So for me, I'm currently the director of emerging technologies at Calibrity, is a small consulting firm based in Ohio. I've been here for almost a year now. So my task is supposed to be building up this AI practice and for the consultancy. But my background, though, I haven't been too long as a consultant or anything, but rather I started off my career in the 90s, kind of early 90s, late 80s, as a software engineer. So developer, so I was doing things like Unix and C, and then eventually, that time too was funny. I got into the the world. And my boss at the time was this 50 years old guy, is just coding. He was a manager. It's interesting too. It was like kind of all the Fortran, the old stuff. So that's how I came from. And then eventually Java came into being in kind of 1995. It's almost actually Java is going to be 30 years. So that's why I was celebrating too with the community here in Germany as well, in addition to the conference. But anyway, so I started getting involved with Java. At the time, it wasn't open source then, right? It was just Sun Microsystems and the JavaSoft division. But I started kind of getting interested and switching to Unix over to Java stuff, and then eventually worked for this company called Sybase and still doing development, kind of server development stuff. And then in early 2000s too, slowly too, because of the Java ecosystem, brings in Apache Software Foundations. It's all open source driven. So I kind of started off more as a like consumer of open source because of Apache, of the Java involvement. I didn't have time at the time to participate in any like participation of the open source community, but I was working for different industry, and I moved to Chicago and then started working for companies, in the IT space, and using mainly continue to use open source and getting into the cloud and DevOps, all these things. And then I was starting to get a bit kind of tired for some reason. It's just like into the 90s and 2000 and no, actually, what was it? Into 2000, 2010. And then I decided it's time I wanted to join the community, and I joined Java users group. And also to user group too, we involve ourselves, and we promote open source software a lot too. Again, with more Apache Software Foundation, Eclipse Foundation. And then because of my involvement with the Java users group, I think it was funny too. I got so interested in it, I became like a user group junkie. I mean, not only was I going to Java users group, I was also, there's JavaScript in Chicago, there's Python, all these things. I would go and meet people, all these things. And, a lot of times too, people are just very open source minded too. So that's how I get more and more involved. And little did I know, I got a chance to then become a developer advocate, which I'm passionate. I'm thinking, why didn't I start earlier? Because I love the interaction. I mean, I'm a strange person. I'm introvert some ways, but on the other hand, I'm also extrovert. I love the interaction. So, and because of that too, I became an advocate first at IBM, and then IBM, of course, very kind of strong participant in open source, leading a lot of the Eclipse Foundation, so Software Foundation projects. So I haven't been as much of a contributor of code, but I'm more of an advocate, talking about different software. And even to this day, there's Apache software, Kafka, things like that, that I'm mostly I would be doing code, but more for advocacy type of purpose. So that's me, and I continue to be very active in the community as well. I continue to run Java users group in Chicago and also AI Camp. I started getting into AI as well, Gen AI. It's just, you cannot escape. So, but anyway, I think I'm just passionate about that, and I just love the community, love meeting people, and then the Java community is also pretty amazing too. It's a very welcoming, kind of community. You can come in, everybody come, and like just now I'm here in Germany at the, as of today, and just speaking at conferences, meeting people there, also like mentoring opportunity, things like that. So long story short, that's how I, got involved with all of these technology, open source, and just very open, very flexible. I love it. I love that community participation. So yeah.
Thank you, Mary. And I love that too, hearing those stories, because I can see in the panel, they have so many different starting points, different points in their career. And this thing that seemed to unite all of you, it's that they have that drive, wanting to be part of a larger community. And it's actually challenging some of the stereotypes behind the coders, that it's a solo enterprise and you go on your own and you don't talk to anybody and you're just you coding. And actually, when it's very collaborative and it's very, community driven. And the other thing I loved about what you said is that you are introverted or extroverted. And I can see that a lot of the people who would class themselves, me included, as an introvert, is like certain spaces make you more introverted than others. That when you find your home, you find your community, then you are very happy to, you actually get renewed energy from the interactions, right? So so happy to hear about that. And the other thing you mentioned was mentoring. So I'd like to be able to explore that a little bit more for everybody. So was there a specific moment, experience, or mentor that first inspired you to get involved in the open source field? And actually, I posed this question as somebody who's got a background in education. I am not a contributor in open source, and I'm learning a lot from listening to you, but I am a lecturer in a university. So I do help students to actually, develop themselves as developers, and often the coursework they do is of very high quality. And sometimes we ask them, okay, where are you going next? Are you going to try and commercialize it, or would you consider making open source? So I'd like to think that even that little word of encouragement may have been the thing that made the person to say, okay, maybe I'll look into get involved a little bit into open source. So for you, was there a specific moment or a mentor that helped you? I see Eriol nodding, so maybe you'd like to start?
Sure. I think the first time I heard about open source, it was kind of funny because I was in commercial proprietary working with in a startup with a team of devs. And I first really started getting engaged with open source because we were hiring a new developer, specifically, I think, in Swift language for Apple. Anyway, but I remember looking at CVs, and that's when I was like, oh, what's open source? What are all these open source contributions on these CVs? And that's when I started to gently interrogate my developer colleagues of like, what is open source and why does it have to be on every single developer CV? Is it that important? How do you find time for it? Like, you do this in your spare time. What is spare time? Do I have spare time to do open source? And I got into this quite involved and deep conversation about actually the equity and equality between really genders in open source, because I was kind of looking towards my predominantly male developer startup team. And they had all this wonderful time to work on open source in their spare time. And then I was like, well, what's your partner doing while you work on open source? And it's like, oh, they're doing the chores, they're looking after the kids. So I was like, maybe they want to contribute to open source too. And they were like, huh, interesting. But anyway, the other people, there are two other people that really, so that's how I got to know about open source. But there are two people that were really important in my early days of open source that really helped me to feel embraced and warm and welcome as you said, a quite unusual function in open source through the design side of things. The first one is the now executive director of Ushahidi, Angela Odor Lungati. She's an amazing person. She now runs Ushahidi. She started out as a junior coder at Ushahidi, and now she's the executive director. She also founded, along with some other people at Ushahidi, this amazing school in Nairobi that teaches girls coding. It's like a coding bootcamp in Nairobi. It takes people from the rural areas of Kenya and teaches them coding. It's called Akira Chicks. And yeah, just she was a constant presence of inclusion and encouragement for how I wanted to participate in open source, and she still is that for many people, I think. And the second person that was really important to me was outside of my role at Ushahidi. I met Dwayne O'Brien, and some people might know the name Dwayne O'Brien. He used to lead the open source program office at Indeed. He also did some of the open source work at Adobe. And he did some really interesting work around how to internally in organizations pay contributors in open source. Like, so it was this framework for within organizations, you could nominate who you wanted your organization to pay as a maintainer, like so that you can, as an organization and as the employees, you can really show, with the money, like how much you appreciate people maintaining open source. And those were the people that were really important within the various stages of my open source career, and many more since as well.
That's wonderful to hear. And also that it's already beginning to unpick that actually open source doesn't mean working for free. doesn't mean just having the thing that you do in your spare time. So if you value it as a company and you give the space to do it, then you also have to reward it. So very important message there for those who listen. I would like to go next to share who were the mentors and what's, Rizel.
I could go next. I would say I relate with what was last said. Kind of so yes, open source is not working for free, but I did have that perspective at first because I kind of came into tech initially for the money. So I was like, why would I waste my time doing free code? I only write code to get paid. So like that was like my mindset, which was probably not a great mindset. But then also like what you was mentioned about like different disparities, like I didn't necessarily have that time marked out to be able to code, but when I joined GitHub as a developer advocate, or actually when I got the like acceptance letter, my to-be manager like DM'd me on the side and he was like, in your interview you said you never contributed to open source, like you need to contribute like literally today. He's like, if you want to like be able to like work here and you know like be able to mesh with the team and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, cool. And he ended up sharing his own open source project with me, and he was like, you can go ahead and like contribute to this. And I was initially, in addition to me being like, why will I waste my time with this, I was a little nervous or intimidated by contributing to open source because some projects are like very heavily technical. They've already have like so much going on in them. You have to have been like an early contributor to know what this next part is, and it makes it a little bit harder when you don't actually know the people. Like you don't really have a team that you're like talking to and being like, oh hey, like how does this work? So what helped me was he kind of just knowing him and him saying, yeah, like contribute to this. I was like, cool. Now I have someone I can ask questions to. And he showed me his Discord and all that. And I realized the experience was actually way easier than I was imagining it was. It wasn't as scary as I imagined it at first. So after that, I became like a contributor of open source and a supporter of other people and getting them into it. And then I think additionally, when I joined, oh, and I should name him. His name's Brian Douglas. That was my manager. And then when I joined Block, my manager now is Angie Jones. And I think she's pushed me to make even like more technical contributions and really just think about like how will my code affect other people? How will like external users read this? Or even just thinking about like a lot of times my team supports the documentation, thinking about like just even having components that can basically run against tests and show if the code snippet's out of date and stuff like that. So rather than just thinking of it on the surface level, like, yeah, I completed this, I've been able to like maybe in a year think about it from a more technical and different perspective, which I appreciate.
No, it's wonderful to hear that the different type of mentorship as well, that unlocks certain things in you that made you go into open source more fully and in different ways. So yeah, I saw Mary nodding at the mention of the mentor, so I let you go next.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, yeah, I think I can kind of echo all the sentiment. It's so nice again to hear, different folks sharing the experience. In my case, as I mentioned too, I didn't, actively like directly contributing to open source, but more about using it because I was working for IT companies or something, IT shops. And but as such, when I started helping out the Java users group, and there were people also, they were advocating for open source. Yeah, obviously it's like folks who are actually participants in certain projects. And I started talking with them, you're interacting with the community, learning from them. And that's how I eventually got the job at IBM as a developer advocate. And of course, IBM, they, again, like Rizel was saying too, it's not free. Open source, in some ways, IBM pays the engineers who are working on full-time on certain open source projects. But because of my particular team at the time, also working with the open source ecosystem at the time within IBM. So I had tons of experience interacting with a lot of different open source development teams at IBM. And so I'd say, didn't really say, so to speak, have one particular mentor, but the whole environment where I was in was so heavily advocating for open source and IBM investing in it. And I actually eventually also participated in some of the Eclipse Foundation projects as well. So yeah, it's just been great. I think for me, again, not like heavily coding every day, just the nature of my job as advocate, but advocate too, you need to understand that I have engineering background, so that helped a lot. And it's just that you are active with the community, you are contributing. If I see something, I raise questions and you ask questions, or you using it and you find problems, you talk about it. That type of stuff is also very important, or some documentation needs to be enhanced, that type of stuff too. So you're contributing in many different ways, and you want that software to be very usable for the community as well. You're encouraging everybody to provide feedback, right? It's not closed. And I just love that model. I think that's how things should be working. We are all collaborating. There's no you against me or something. We're all sharing the common good, everybody enhancing it, and you get a better, output from everybody contributing to it. So anyway, that's my story about, kind of more like getting mentor, getting kind of involved with the open source community. And I continue to do that to this day, and just involved with the community that way. So yeah.
No, that's great. And also knowing that if you are in an environment that actually encourages you, like generally, you don't have to have a single out mentor that would push you in that direction, but the whole environment, it's like, if you like, everybody's mentoring each other, because that's the nature of open source. So especially when the employer is recognizing that as a worthwhile endeavor. But also I wonder if it's something else that you can do while you are actually between jobs, or while you are seeking how to improve, keep yourself active when you are still in the job market and so on. And you're still keeping in touch with the mentors and keeping in touch with the community somehow, even though you don't have that paid employment. So I'd like to hear next from Carlisia about mentoring and yes, this conversation we've been having.
Yes, so I think we are talking about, we did open source and then we stayed in open source, and why, and who are people who we looked up to or look up to currently. I want to point out that there are very different types of open source projects, just like there are many different types of companies. One thing that I really liked about, and still like about open source, is that you can be a developer or a programmer in an open source project. You can be, so let's say you are one of the maintainers in the project. You still have to have a very entrepreneurial mind. You have to wear a lot of hats. It's not for everybody. I love it. So it's a very unique type of endeavor. And also, there's a very big difference between having code and developing something, a software, a product in public, and versus it being like having a true open source culture. So when I started being paid to work in open source, I didn't come with the open source culture. I knew what open source was, just like most people do. But really, I need to give a shout out to a few people who came from the open source culture, because this is like a whole other talk by itself. But one thing that I can think about that makes a difference is the users of that open source project. In my case, I've built tools for developers, so the users of my projects were also developers. They have a lot more stake. As users, they have stake in the project as if they had some ownership. This is my way of describing one big difference that I noticed immediately. And I had to learn that because, for example, if a user wanted something, at that point, I was like a senior engineer. I've been around. I would have a way to respond. But I started noticing that there was a lot more empathy in the way that the other maintainers who came from an open source culture would respond. They were a lot more inquisitive. Like, why do you need this? they were a lot more engaging, as opposed to, we don't have time, we don't have the resource, here's a roadmap, that's the next thing. If you want this done, let's talk about for the next. They will be willing to reconsider their thinking, what they believed in, what they thought was right, because somebody came and made a request or posed the problem, or I hope this I hope I explained that well. It's very, very different. And so my first open source project was Velero, and Andy Goldstein, amazing. He was the tech lead in the project when I joined. All of these 4 people I'm going to mention, they probably will be surprised, but I was watching you closely and I was learning a ton as far as how to lead and work in an open source project and interact with people who are using it. So Andy Goldstein, Nolan Brubaker, Dave Protasevsky, and Evan Anderson. The last 2, they were they created the Knative project. Basically, they were like the OGs of that project. There were so many people I learned from, but in terms of how to operate in open source, yeah. And did I cover all your questions?
Absolutely, and it's beautiful to hear that actually it's not one mentor. It's not like like an apprenticeship kind of roles that you have one person that passes the trade. It's actually very, I think it's representative of what open source is. You have many influences, and many are actually the people you're developing for. So it's not a hierarchical kind of relationship. It's very networked and very meshed. So thank you so much.
And Adriana, if I can wedge one more thing in, because
Please.
I really want to say what kept me enjoying working open source, like I said, can be so different from project to project. I had my challenges. It can be very challenging, even if you love open source. But there is such a direct connection between what you do and people using it. Like, it's almost immediate. So when in a commercial product, it comes in a different way. Open source is very different. It was very satisfying. I love that, and the entrepreneurial aspect of it, having to wear multiple hats. Anyway, so.
Yeah, and thank you. That leads me beautifully to my next question, because there are so many hats to wear. So what is your favorite aspect of the open source arena then? Which of the hats that you got to wear is the one you prefer personally? So let's start with you, Carlisia, since you just brought that up. Yeah.
Well, at my heart, I'm a programmer. I like to build things. So what I like most about working in open source is just being able to build something. And so open source is very challenging, that you can have something and you don't know who's using it. If you have a very good project, people are using it and they're not letting you know because there are no problems. If there are a lot of bugs, you hear from people, but
Why
if
is this not working?
it's like anyway, you have to make such a big effort to elicit feedback from people if your project is well maintained and pretty bug free. But at the same time, the possibility, like the reach, like when you work for a commercial company, they have their markets, they're very targeted. When you work in open source, I mean, of course you have an audience for that. It's not anyone. It's like the only people who are going to use it is people who need that functionality. However, it's like it could be anybody. It's like all over the world. It could reach. You can have such a wide impact, and you just never know. One day somebody's like from out of nowhere, oh, I used this and it helped me. That possibility for me is I live for it.
Thank you. How about you, Rizel? What's your favorite part of open source development?
I didn't raise my hand for this because I was like, I don't know. I think I have a hard time choosing between one. I think that's also why I like being in developer relations or developer advocacy, is because like I like to jump around on different things. Like if I stay on one particular task for too long, I may feel maybe bored or like fatigued. So I think the aspect of open source that I like the best is I can code and I can blog and I can talk to people and I can just do basically exercise all the skills and all my passions.
So it's changing the hats that you like. That is the
Yeah, that's
feature
the
of
part I
yeah.
like.
Wonderful. How about you, Errol?
I definitely resonate with building together. Just building collaboratively is essentially really a fundamental aspect of design, like good design, essentially. Like good design should not happen just by one person behind a closed door and then, you know, thrown over the fence to developers to build. That's not how good things are built for good user purposes. I would say more recently, the thing that I'm particularly focused on doing is bringing more designers into open source. So since working at Ushahidi and through some of my other open source roles and organizations, I've built out workshop frameworks. I go to open source conferences and invite designers in to do contributions. I teach developers how they can contribute design themselves or better understand what it is like to receive a design contribution so they can actually set themselves up to welcome in design contributions to their projects. I also like to remind a lot of developers that just because you have a CLI tool doesn't mean that you don't need design. It's very important, the design of your conversational history and the commands that you're using, very important design aspects there, as well as accessibility. And yeah, I love bringing in new fresh ideas into open source, and that's really what I see in the open source design space is this different way of looking at who the tools are for originally, like who they're geared towards, and then thinking about who hasn't been welcomed into open source before, who could really benefit from learning more about open source and it being more accessible. So yeah, doing those kinds of aspects of open source work, bringing in the designers is really where I'm finding a lot of my passion, as well as fantastic open source design tooling being created, such as Penpot app. So now you can make designs in open source tools and hand them off to developers as well.
Wow,
Innovation.
Yeah, that's really great because it's kind of showing that it's not just the one thing. It's not just being an advocate, but it's also actually enjoying the making and designing and all that. So brilliant. How about you, Mary? What's your
Sure,
favorite?
Oh, my favorite. Yeah, definitely. I think the building side and being able to, it's like things are not going to be dictated by certain, small groups of people or a single person. It is going to be, open for, open for anybody to contribute ideas to it too. So I like that aspect of, everybody has a voice in it, and you don't have, if you don't like it, you can go, change it, or at least like put in a request to change it and talk about it. So I really like that aspect rather than, I'm basically not going to be forced to use something that I don't feel comfortable using. I have the right to also alter it to become better, to contribute my ideas to it. So I really like that aspect of, open source. Yeah, essentially. So yeah.
No, wonderful. And it's really nice to hear that it's such a welcoming community, right? But I'm sure some members of our audience would be wondering whether open source is the right path for them. So again, I'm going to ask you all, what is your experience according to your experience, who is this field best suited for? So I sense that from what your answers are, it will be for those who are makers, right? But who should consider getting involved? Shall I start with Errol? Who should?
Gosh,
Yeah.
My very short answer is I think everyone should get involved in open source, regardless of what you think or perceive your your value to be. I think everyone has value that they can bring to open source, even if it is the contribution of using open source and attempting to use open source, and that I think a lot of people don't consider the people that use open source and don't contribute back as open source contributors, but they're contributing by using, by ideally then giving some feedback and helping calibrate the tools better. So I don't necessarily think that any people are best suited. I think anyone can be suited to an open source, an aspect of open source, but particularly I'd encourage designers to really consider the power of contributing to open source, like that real experience of working with asynchronous development teams. You just don't get that kind of experience when you're like learning design through like traditional education mechanisms. But when you engage in open source, you're creating real tools that real people are using, collaborating with real like developers across the world, and you really can't beat that experience as a designer.
Wonderful. Mary?
Oh, yeah. I think Eriol hit the spot just right there like that too. And I also feel, right, a lot of things actually have open source component to things like, maybe your car that you're driving, they're actually open source in your, the audio system or something, and things that we don't even think of. And like Eriol said too, I think it should be for everybody. Anybody can make suggestions if they don't like something, if they see some, another way of making it better. We all have the right, the opportunity to voice our opinion and contribute new ideas to it, to making it better. So I think that's the aspect that I think is really essence of open source. Yeah, and of course, ignoring maybe sometimes there are still political whatever things to their companies controlling it that you can't avoid, but for the most part, I think it's a really good concept that everybody has the right to contribute your ideas, and doesn't have to be coding exactly, right? It can be anything like writing, leaving a comments, finding a bug with this, suggesting a better way of doing things. So I think that's the way things should be. So
I'm hearing anyone on anything. How about your views, Rizel? Same,
Yeah,
different?
I agree. Everyone. I don't see why we would leave anyone out. I think it's not like you have to be this certain way to be able to contribute to open source. Like you don't have to have a certain skill set. In fact, like the diversity of skill sets is really helpful. And like in talking to other maintainers, they're swamped with lots of stuff. It's not just like straight up coding that they have to do. They kind of have to do project management. They kind of have to dispute like arguments between contributors and all of that. So those are other ways that people can get involved, if like in addition to using the tool, and in addition to actually writing code for the tool, is like you can ask the maintainer like, hey, can I help you with like triaging tickets, or answering questions in your whatever forum that you use for your project or whatever. Like there's so many different ways you can contribute. Like, I don't know, write a blog post about how cool you think the tool is. I don't know. But it's not just like, oh, this needs to be just for engineers. Anyone can really get involved.
Thank you. Yes. Carlisia?
There are only two people who should work in open source, in my opinion. One is if you use open source. If you personally, not even for your work, personally use any open source tool. And the other type of people is if you don't. So
I was thinking, am I hearing a different answer here? But absolutely for everyone, and that's a really good. It sounds like it's a very inclusive community.
It's a tricky answer, but it's just the way you approach it. Because so I'm talking to people who might not be in open source already, right? If you use any tool, then some projects have like a show and tell section. You can just go and show, and like that will inspire other people. Oh, I didn't know I could do this. You can open an issue like for that tool, and maybe something you want, like a feature request, like start where you are. And if you don't use any open source tool, which is very common, then you can try to engage with that type of work, because we were saying here, some of us were saying here how hard it is to have that privileged time to up your skills, right? So it is a major privilege to be able to do that. But every once in a while, I think we all take time to do that. And then what are you going to do? Are you going to take a course? Are you going to get raised? Or one option is to do open source. Now, I'm going to speak strictly to developers because I don't know the alternatives for other areas. But from being in the fields, from being in the tech industry for a while, no, there's no payoff if you want to improve your career, if you want to improve your skills, if you are a programmer. There's nothing comes close than doing something in open source. Even if you don't use it, then it's gonna just suck a little more because you have to learn the domain. But it's going to be such a big payoff, and I don't know anything that comes close to that. And it can be fun, it can be satisfying.
Yeah, I'm going to ask now a question for Mary, following up with it. Sounds like a very inclusive place to be, but how would you actually describe the current state of inclusion in the open source community? So what factors are driving that progress, and what challenges are still holding us back?
Oh, sure. Well, I don't know whether mine may be little kind of, because I've been mostly involved with the Java community, and some now to a certain degree also AI. I'd say, say from the Java community, the Apache Software Foundation or the Eclipse Foundation, I'm finding it to be quite open. Yeah, everything. And we also back at IBM, lots of women too, not just men, and working in the, in the space and leading some program managers, for example. So it seems like definitely it's good right now. But again, I cannot speak for other communities, and that I am not exactly sure. Maybe the other folks can comment on that too. But so far, like I said, the Java community has been pretty good, pretty open. Yeah. So that's my observations.
Wonderful to hear. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So same question to Rizel. So how would you describe the current state of inclusion in the open source communities you've been on?
Yeah, I think it's inclusive in the sense of I'm trying to think. Okay, I think the circles I'm in, they are inclusive, but I don't want to act like, oh yeah, like it's always inclusive, because I think open source has a low amount of like people of different races, especially like Black people, and still a low amount of or a low ratio men to women. So I just happen to have searched out or sought out projects that have had mostly or not mostly women, but a good balance of women or a good balance of various races. But I think there's still more work to be done.
Absolutely. And I'd like to think that just having you sharing your stories should do something to redress that balance, to increase the visibility of this is a valuable, a career choice or activities to get involved in. So my question now to Eriol is, what are some of these challenges that women and non-binary individuals may face when trying to get involved in open source? And then what strategies or support systems can help them navigate these obstacles?
Gosh, this question is tricky because I don't necessarily think that there's particular challenges. The challenges of being underrepresented in any field are the same challenges that women and non-binary and other kinds of identities have in open source. We are underrepresented within open sources, predominantly white, cis, hetero, male dominated, as is tech generally, as is also the power within tech, and the power to influence tech is kind of held there. And so the places that I see the challenges are in the positions of perceived power. So you find like a lot of the benevolent dictators for life tend to be men, a lot of the maintainers tend to be men. And that might be because of these kind of old-fashioned archaic notions of who has the time to do what and who is making time to do what in their personal lives or in their work lives. But I also think, systemically there are these kinds of problems about underrepresented people speaking up for the things that they want to do as part of like their career progression. So, you know, I've certainly found it a lot harder as a function, you know, that is underrepresented. Design is underrepresented in open source. As a non-binary queer person, I perceive to be a woman, it's very hard for me to advocate for myself to say, hey, I deserve a space in this open source space. But I also, you know, I do also maybe deserve a place of influence and power at some point, should I be qualified for it as well. And I think the structures and strategies to seek out that help around those kinds of things are finding, as Rizel said, is finding your communities within the community, finding the people that lift you up, the give you the platform to help you express yourself, and don't kind of give you any glass ceilings or glass cliffs, as we're kind of familiar with in being women in tech. And also, I think just because I would be sad if I didn't mention it, I also think that something that really needs to be challenged a lot more is how we are funding and supporting open source as structures. So where is the capital going in open source? Is it going to these founders, VC funded people that typically get these kinds of things, or like, you know, where is that shift of like you know, power going, and can it go to more underrepresented identities as well? So I would challenge anyone and everyone in the community to really interrogate who you're putting in positions of power and how you can make space for those that are underrepresented.
Wow, this is very powerful. Yeah, indeed. And also the other thing that comes to mind that is particularly a challenge for underrepresented groups is the imposter syndrome, and you know, that fear of making mistakes when you are in a public forum. You know, and so how can any practical advice that any of you can share with how can you overcome that? Maybe from past experience, anybody?
I don't think that, well, maybe I have a weird perspective, but I don't think that imposter syndrome is something that we necessarily need to get over, if that makes any sense. I think at least for me, I try to embrace it. Like I'll go in and I'll be like, I'm not going to be the smartest person here, but everybody else is not. Like everybody has different knowledge gaps. So I go in with like, or I've tried to teach myself to go in with a perspective that I'm here to learn, and I'll be like, hey, here's what I did, what do you think? And I've learned how to accept feedback as not like they're not saying like, hey, you're not smart, you don't know what you're doing, or they're not trying to like undermine me, but it's a learning experience for me. So I think imposter syndrome happens when you start thinking like, oh my gosh, people are going to think I'm dumb, and then something bad will happen and they'll take away my job or my role, or think I'm not good enough. But I think when you go in with like, hey, I want to learn, I want to figure out how to get better, and what they're telling me is just to help me improve, it kind of helps you to embrace imposter syndrome. Because I think as you continue to get higher and advance more, the imposter syndrome is always going to come back. So there, to me, I don't think there's a point in really like fighting against it, and just instead working with it.
I think that's a beautiful practical advice, you know, recognizing you're always going to have some knowledge gaps. So not parting from the position of I need to know everything before I actually can share it with the world. It's very powerful, yes. In the interest of time, I'm going to move to the next question. So we have one for Carlisia. So you took a sabbatical during your career. So how did that stepping away from the tech industry shape your perspective of open source and contribution or leadership?
Yes, so I was talking to telling that to somebody, and he was like, oh, I wish I could do it. I wish I could do a long sabbatical. And I'm sorry, but everybody can. I didn't do it like financially. I wasn't in a financially comfortable way to do it. I was in a financial way to do it, but it cost me a lot of money. But for me, I felt like I needed to take a break. My personal life was suffering. My work life wasn't what I wanted to be. I was in a very good position, but I just wasn't. I don't know. I just didn't know. It's like, what is going on? The more problems that I needed to solve, both in my personal life and at work, the harder I work, and I'm not seeing the impact that I want, and I'm just getting exhausted. I'm like, I can't go for the rest of my life like this. So that's why I took a break, because I'm a hustler. But what worked for me in my upcoming to be like a seasoned engineer, a mature person, wasn't working anymore. It was just making me exhausted without the payoff. So I felt like I hit a wall. I'm giving context here so my answer will make more sense. So basically at that point, I was like, the answer is not work harder. And that was pretty much the only tool I had in my toolbox was work harder for everything. Failing as a mom, work harder. Failing at work harder. And I was just like, no, this is killing me. And Rizel seems much, much younger than me. And it's like, fills my heart with joy to see so much wisdom, because it's basically what she said. You can rewind this and listen to her. That's exactly it. I think this, like, let's get over our imposter syndrome, I think is bullshit. So do you want to get worse with imposter syndrome? Try to get over it, because you focus on it and then you get really good at having imposter syndrome. So it's basically, so anyway, I took a 2-year sabbatical. I did 2 coaching programs. I'm not saying like, oh, I fixed myself, but I have a lot of tools now. And it's funny because one of the tools that I have is to just notice. I am able to notice when I have a fear that I'm failing or like I didn't do something right. I am able to say to myself, yeah, maybe, and then move on to the next thing without falling apart. And then like chasing the next thing to right, add value to. So basically, yes, being able to, I have always been gutsy, but for me, this presents in a different way. It's like the bigger challenges for me, I guess, as compared to like before. I don't know how to explain well, but it's basically what Rizel said. Be scared. You're going to be scared to do things. You're going to be scared to put yourself out there, but I could do it anyway. So I have done a lot of putting myself out there, but I had always this like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm right for the job. I'm not sure I'm the best person for this. I'm not sure what I'm saying is right. So I have learned through my sabbatical that I have so much curiosity, such a passion for building and creating, inventing, collaborating. And open source is a great venue. And it doesn't need to be my paid work. I can interact with people in so many different ways. I use a lot of open source tools, and being able to have impact, but an impact that's more aligned, like having that like intention and goal and doing the thing that will cause impact. I developed this skill. It's like what it means to have impact for me as well, not just for others, but like what is it that I really want to make that mental connection. So open source for me is a way for me to like relax and have creativity, help others, also do things for me. I'm going to start writing blog posts, which I like never had the nerve to do. Like I have ideas, and they might not be the best ideas, but they're my ideas. So for me, this is all ties into contribution, leadership, having your own unique voice is of value. And anything you do is of value. And also collaboration is so important because you get an immediate reflection. Like if you're open to feedback, people tell you this is valuable or this is not valuable. Then you just move on. It's like something like that.
No, this is thank you so much for sharing that experience, because it sounds actually that open source has been that safe haven for you to go to actually keep in touch with yourself and your technical skills, and getting back as well from the community into, you know, you're actually building your own connection to
It's a
creation
good
of
place.
source and all that.
Yeah, it's a good place to go and validate. Like I can look at code, I can look
And at the pace
discussions.
you want, right?
Exactly. When I want, at the pace I want, exactly.
So thank you all. So I think I'm going to lead us to the last question for everybody to answer. So to leave us in a practical and happy note, could you share one tip for newcomers on how to get started in open source if they haven't yet, and one piece of advice for early career professionals on how to grow and advance in the field? So who would like to start? Mary, I'll ask you.
Me. Okay, well, I think, anybody should join if they feel the calling, so to speak, right? And just don't be, I guess along the line, like Calista was talking about, Rizel talking about too, everybody is like, don't be like so self-conscious or saying that I can't, I mean, what can be worse, right? I mean, even if you don't get it to work or something, you learn something, right? So I think, well, just from my perspective, I know you look at me like, I just feel the older I get, I realize, you know what, time is, I don't live forever. So may as well like enjoy the moment, right? And be thankful, like, just because we can do this kind of work is already a privilege in itself. I started to see it that way. So it's less about myself. It's just more like I'm here to give, to be contributing, to give, right, to share, and that makes me happy. So even if I do something wrong, I have the best intention. I think then I am doing best. If not, I go and ask people. These days I have developed a thick skin. I really go and ask people, what did I do wrong? You tell me things like that, right? If I kind of send something and it isn't wrong, and actually that's what I found out too, is that once you kind of open up like that, then people are actually, in general, they are very forgiving. Nobody really is judgmental, or at least I've been very fortunate. I have to be thankful. My community have been so accepting. Right? Even like today, I was doing a presentation. I said, oh, gee, my demo didn't work. And I kind of figured something out to work around. Yeah, it was kind of amazing. I realized I apologized to people in the beginning. I said, I'm sorry, I couldn't get things work. But I have something else to show you. And I think people are very accepting overall. So, and also to wanting to thank Calista too for sharing your story, to be, sharing something, right, that otherwise people think is vulnerable, but don't feel it's vulnerable. I think because all of us have, as some of you mentioned too, we have some kind of things that we aren't as good in, a weakness, so to speak, just face it, right? Telling people about it, asking people to help you. Actually, people will all open up and help you too. I do believe that. And so for me, just keep a thankful heart and be joyful and be kind of sharing all these things that are good, meaning to be good to one another. I think it's, it applies to all kinds of situations. So yeah, I hope it helps in that case.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, you're welcome.
Eriol.
I hope I'm gonna say two things from two different perspectives. One for the designers that might be listening, that are curious about open source, and one for the developers that are like, what if I want to make friends with a designer that wants to contribute to my open source? So for the developers that want to welcome designers into their space, I'll drop a link in the chat. We did some research with designers on what they want to see in open source projects and how they make contributions to open source projects. So this is a really fantastic resource. If you've got the time to give it a read, there's also some tips towards the bottom on how you can make your open source project more welcoming for design contributions. But from a developer perspective, I would also recommend, I've had a fantastic developer that I go to FOSDEM every year with, and they are my go-to developer when I'm like, oh, how do I use Docker again? How do I make an image work on Docker? And they're my like developer buddy that I know that I can ask any like basic questions that I might have. So developers, consider reaching out to designers and making friends with them and helping them on their journey. And hopefully they will find a way to help you make open source more usable as well. And from the design side of things, I'd really encourage designers to check out the open source design community. That's the community I maintain. We have a monthly community call where you can come and learn more about what designers are doing in open source. Obviously, not just designers go there. Anybody is welcome at our community call. But designers, particularly when they're looking for community and that first step into how do I build a career here? How do I make participation and contribution part of my design practice? Then that's a really great place to find really fantastic peers on our community calls and also in our discourse forum.
Wonderful, thank you. So I really like the dual message, because in the end it's going to benefit the whole community if they make friends, right? So Carlisia.
So the question is how to get started?
No, what tip would you give to people? Could be either to get started or as an early career professional, or how to grow once you're started.
To get started, I would say try to avoid thinking that open source is such a big deal that for you to have any impact or any visibility, you have to do something big. It's not, it is so not like that. The tiny things, the detailed things, those are actually things that get dropped a lot. And start where you are. Lurk around, like any tool you use that you love, if you're using open source. If not, maybe, what if I were to use open source, what would it be? Maybe it's a command line tool that does something. It's like, anyway, start where you are, start small, and build from there. Because I'm a big believer in like focus on the next thing. Because when you get that thing, that fire in your belly from that thing, you're gonna want the next thing. But you don't know until you do that thing really like in a way that's joyful. Like Mary was saying, it's like joy is so important. So try to cultivate joy. Like find like what would bring me joy. Like I'm doing it because I want to. And maybe doesn't have to be tech related. Maybe it's like I want to work with this person. I love this person. They're my hero. I don't care what they're doing. I want to do something adjacent to them. Go help them. It's such a great way to be inspired. I'm not going to give a tip for like, if you are already in open source. Okay, so if you are already in open source, if you are a seasoned professional, I would just say, get organized, write your thinking, develop your thinking, and develop your leadership skills. With AI, the volume of work is going to go bananas. So make sure you are well organized. If you're a developer, like that's what I'm doing. If you're a developer, make sure you know how to use your IDE as an expert at an expert level, because you're going to need it. Those are my tips.
No, I love the tips. Start where you are, embracing joy, and also be organized. Rizel.
Yeah, I would say for both beginners and people already in open source, just continue to embrace learning in public. So like put yourself out there, even if it's something small, that like just put out what you've learned.
Wonderful. We ended up with the wisest comment there. Cannot top that up. So I must actually thank you all for sharing very candidly your histories, your contributions, your paths, and being vulnerable about it as well, and being so inspiring, and learned lots from you. So I've been Adriana Wilde. I am ACM Communications Co-Chair, and I need to recognize once again the tireless work that Bushra and Anjum has put into putting this series together. So thank you all.